Hello coaches, thanks for joining me for another Modern Soccer Coach interview. This week we're trying something completely different. We've decided to look at some challenges in the coaching community and discuss solving those challenges. This week we're going to look at an email that I get quite often about working with the team in different ability levels or experienced and inexperienced players and how to mesh all that together and how to supplement and manage it and all those different processes. We're joined today by Ally Bain. Ally's an academy coach. He's also started up his own online analysis platform for players and coaches, Insight Analysis. The link is below. So here we go, 35 minutes discussing how you can manage inexperienced and experienced players all together in the same team and get effective solutions. Please give it a like and a subscribe below. And if you've got another topic that you want us to take on, please put it in the comments. Before we start, I'd like to give a big shout out to our sponsor, SportsLab 360. As a coach, and we're going to discuss this in this interview. It feels like you're always looking for more time to teach players different concepts, but not when you use SportsLab 360. You can assign interactive modules to your players outside of training time so they can continue the learning process. Stick around at the halfway point for a special offer for Modern Soccer Coach listeners. All right, here is Ally. Enjoy.
Ally, thanks so much for joining me today for the Modern Soccer Coach podcast.
It's a pleasure to me. Thanks for having me back on.
Brilliant. We're going to hopefully do a couple more of these. My goal is to put something on one of the social media pages a couple of days ago. It was like, all right, instead of doing a podcast on journeys or something like that, let's look at some challenges that people are facing, and then let's have a chat about fixing them, how we would fix them, not necessarily how they're supposed to be fixed. And we'll have a bit of fun with it. We just had a brief chat there before. So this is a problem, Ally, that I sent you the email, and I'm going to read this out, not the whole email. And I've got a few of these over the last year. It's basically, he's got a dilemma. I have a team of mostly inexperienced players, quite young, to the point first touch is I'm going to change some of the wording here. First touch is a challenge. My question is, how do I address this issue of basically having a team of players, experienced players is a nice way of putting it, and inexperienced players all having to come together with limited time to compete. You said just before we started that you've heard this one before, so give me your overview of it.
Well, I think first of all, this is the tough part of youth soccer, right? When you're talking about developing any player, it's what do you focus on first? Is it the team or is it the individuals? And I think sometimes whenever we set up sessions or we think about season plans, we can get too literal with it, because ultimately, guys, when you put a session out, you're developing all the players, even if you literally said nothing and just gave them a ball, right, with a couple of cones down. So I don't think it has to be as prescriptive as, okay, we all have to have a ball each, almost like the curver style in all individual training. I just think you have to approach these things always with a sort of global view of you're looking to improve all of the players, and then with some of them, it's therefore you've maybe got to give them a bit more information, a bit more time. Because I think that's what I've found certainly in my own coaching, is that it's that individual touch that helps players. It's not necessarily just the sessions.
Do you think it's driven by this new phenomenon, not new, but around about 5 years of player development, IDPs? Is it driven by, well, we're now having a more evaluative lens on players just as a coaching community? Is it driven by that, do you think? Or is it driven by not the coach that's emailed, but just coaches in general thinking, I've got to win a match here, and it's hard to win a match when everyone's not at the same level? And, is it the collective driving it, or is it this new phenomenon of player development?
Well, I think definitely there's a drive towards this player development model where we want every player to be the same. And I think that's what concerns me. When you look at professional football now, I mean, even if we take the role of a holding midfielder, just as a position, out the top of my head, how many different profiles are there now of a holding midfielder, right? So if you equate that to a youth player, who, again, a smaller player, a taller player, a slower player, a faster player, they're going to have different characteristics. So thinking that we can develop everyone under this sort of blanket of, well, they're all going to be able to control their back foot, they're all going to be able to receive it on the inside or outside. For some players, Gary, that's just they'll pick that up over time. It's not something we need to worry about today. And there's other players that might be amazing at striking the ball with their laces, and let's go make them better at that. You know what I mean? That's going to help everyone on a weekend. So I think that's definitely where I try and approach it, is not to be so specific on one little thing and just, let it over time develop.
Interesting. That is something I've seen, especially in social media, and I've actually have picked up on this the last couple of years, where positional profiles, where it almost becomes a wish list of a right winger, for example. You use defensive midfielder, I use right winger, cut inside, beat player down the line. But the more that you get experience to higher levels, the more you realise that in context, that player can't do, like if they're playing if it's a pro player playing a high school game, they're probably able to do most things.
Right.
But in context of where you're at, every player, even at professional level, is stronger in some areas. That's probably more, right? There's probably the professional has doubled up on strengths and hid weaknesses, rather than what you're saying there is the average doesn't really exist.
Well, I also think as well, it's that approach to pressure, right? You talk about the top end professionals. It doesn't matter if they've got a man marking them or two players coming down on them. They always seem to be able to regulate a lot of pressure. And I feel for a lot of the youth players now, because we're very possession orientated, certainly in America, where it's quickly moving the ball, and again, that's nothing wrong with that at all. But in lieu of that, sometimes we forget there's going to be times where you can't pass it. There's no way out of where you're at. So you have to be able to solve that problem. And that's where, the big discussion points about, unopposed versus opposed, individual training versus group training. If you put a 5v5 game with 2 goals in a small area, there's going to be scenarios where you're going to do all of those things. And like I say, it's up to you then as a coach as to how you cater that. Is it one touch? Is it we putting touch restrictions? Is there no touch restriction? All of those things become, again, how you set up the environment for your players, because that's then how it's going to look on a weekend.
Yes, the environment. So Judah, this brings us along nicely. It is, I get most of these from high school, so let's use the high school analogy. Club coaches probably have team selection picked a little bit more deliberately. So say you go to West End High School tomorrow, and you notice that there is freshman class or senior class, there's a difference. You're saying that you would go into it with a more like a holistic view of get the session right, rather than I'm going to break this down and do a little bit of extra work with him or her, and then do a little extra work with, you think that keep the main thing. Is that what you're saying?
Well, listen, I'll give an example, right? There's so much on social media now about unopposed passing patterns to goal, for example, right? And when Man City do it, it literally looks like the greatest, and no one misses, and every cross is perfect. And then when you God love you see some of these, youth coaches will run that same session with, again, a high school group, and the balls are going everywhere, they're hitting the parking lot, and the wee keeper's in goals, now you're getting a touch. I think that's where, again, we have to break down where your team's at and where you want it to get to. So if we take going back a step there, the unopposed and opposed, if everything you do has some element of attack v defence, right, there's a obstacle between where you are to the goal. I just think that in simple terms is going to improve the technical level. It's going to improve their understanding. It's going to improve the decision making, because there's an obstacle there. The minute you remove that obstacle, for me, I think that's where players start to switch off. And again, I know that's a hot topic in coaching right now about what that looks like and how you develop that. But just in a pure team sense, right, and improving a group of players, I think that's what you need.
Very, very interesting. What you're saying there is all right, so player X may not be able to thrive in a 4v2 rondo or a 5v2 within the middle player checking a shooter. They're not Busquets, but can you find something that they're decent at, which is the bread and butter of competing right? Attack, be defend. I'm sure the same for you, Ali. When I was growing up, coaching wasn't as methodical and as clinical as what it is today. There was a lot of attack versus defense exercises, which I still think have their place. You learn to compete, you learn to defend, numbers up, numbers down. And I wonder if have we moved away from that there in this fancy word methodology? Have we moved away from, again, are we looking for a possession-based player? Well, surely there's value in that player that can compete, either create or stop.
Well, I think what we've done is I guess a sort of coaching community, right, is that we've maybe complicated a little bit, right? And what I mean by that is if we take the 2-goal approach, right, it's a real simple, here's where I defend behind me, here's where I attack in front of me. Whereas we've now sort of brought in these little 360 games that you mentioned, the rondo there being one of them, or maybe there's an exit game where it's a box and a box, where now all of a sudden I might attack in front of me, to the right-hand side, but if I receive it, I can also attack behind me and get out of the box or, escape or whatnot. So now all of a sudden we're asking players who may be struggling in that sort of regular back and front game to now think 360, and all of a sudden they become overwhelmed, and maybe sometimes that, there's a lot of options that now confuse them. So I think that's the important part is that we don't get away from what is the basics of the game and then allow them to thrive in that. And again, at some point in it, their understanding is going to be there where they can maybe think a little bit bigger picture. But, and this is not to sort of dumb it down for players, Gary. It's just more to put them in an environment where they can be successful and they get more confident at it.
Yeah, you think as you can overcomplicate something, you think of the X's and O's, but you're actually right there. You can overcomplicate it in an exercise that the demands on that player might be a little bit too much. Yeah, that's really interesting. And that can maybe go back then to how we think of, again, define technical efficiency or technical quality, right? Like,
well, if you look at like even the evolution of, let's just even go back to, again, real basics, right? Of when we talk about 7, 8, 9-year-olds, everyone's got a ball, it's dribbling around. Now we're starting to see, passing combinations. You see a lot of these in warm-ups now, and coaches really early are talking about these complicated little manoeuvres and, rotations and whatnot. I think this is where we've got an opportunity now as coaches to break that down and say that all of those things are valid, right? We want every player to be at least comfortable in possession, not be scared of it, so they're just smashing it forward. But at the same time now, put them in a situation where centre-backs are going to control it differently than wingers they are, right? Therefore, if we're asking a central midfielder to turn out of pressure, that's going to be different than a striker does it. So not that we want to put people into positions early, but there's certain kids that gravitate towards those areas. So can we make it a bit more nuanced as to how we set up a practice, right? So going back to your idea there about the rondo earlier, maybe only put central midfielders in the middle, the kids who you think are going to play there, or the kids that play at fullback, put them in spots where they see someone in front of them and someone to the side of them, just so there's that more, a bit more familiarity. So again, it's not such a huge difference when they go into a game. And then again, further to that is trying to set up those games earlier, right? And I speak about this a lot with the coaches at our club in Charlotte, is this idea that the game at the end is where it needs to be. Start with a game, like put it in the middle. I mean, there's all sorts of different, whole part whole and all these, things we've heard for years, but, put it into the sessions where the game obviously is the teacher, but literally the teacher as well. So you're not feeling like, all right, well, come end of the session, that's when we play a game. Like, put it different parts of it and let them live it.
Hello coaches, we'll take a quick break here to thank our sponsor, Sports Lab 360. If you're looking for something to immediately impact the development of performance of your players, you have to check out Sports Lab 360. It's an online platform made up of engaging interactive modules that focus on a variety of tactical principles. As a coach, you can assign these modules to your players prior to training based on what you'll be working on. So instead of progressing the session from A all the way to Z, your players will have a cognitive head start when they arrive. As a result, you won't have to spend as much training time explaining the principles. You can quickly move on to the next layer, implementing your philosophy and your style of play. Coaches can also track progress, put in customized notes, tap into the session plan library, a collaboration that they've done with us, Modern Soccer Coach, to put those concepts together on the field. It's a fantastic platform, and throughout the month of September, you can use the code MSC to save 15% off any Sports Lab 360 plan. Please check it out on the link below, and a massive thanks to them for teaming up with us on these podcasts. Thank you.
Yeah, this fact as well it builds it nicely. This thought process that, all right, so say it's a 15-year-old, 16-year-old, inexperienced players that are alongside ECNL players, and it is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
You're saying, okay, well, what resources could we do? And you mentioned Corva there, which is tried and tested, and it's done what it's done over the years. A lot of good stuff. How much do you think that if you give a 15-year-old with a low experience in football and you did Corva for 2 hours a day for 6 months, how better could that player be in reality?
Yeah, and it's a tough one. I mean, speaking for myself, I'm not so sure a lot, and the reason why is I go back to what I said earlier. If you take away the thinking, if you take away the nuance of what happens when I'm under pressure, personally, I feel the player switches off, right? And there's not that same sort of muscle memory, that same reaction time. If you've got pressure coming from different angles, in front, behind, clearly they're going to react and do things in the sort of the moment. And I guess it's that stream of consciousness for me that you're looking to try and improve. The touch of the ball, right? Whether it be, the angle of approach to strike it, whether they're toes down and up, all of those things. Again, you could argue the cover model will improve that. But if we're figuring that any player has a basic level aptitude, they can strike a ball, they can dribble it and whatnot, the difference between a player who can do those things and can be effective on a Saturday or a Sunday is one who understands what their job is. And if I'm going as a central midfielder and my role in this team is to pit the fullbacks every time, then do that. Make them great at that. If my role as a right winger is to dribble down the sideline and put a ball in the box, put me in those scenarios where I'm going to be, doing that regular in a session. And listen, I know that's an easy thing to say if you've got 30 kids and maybe there's only 2 coaches. Like, you've got to be creative there, and that's where your session planning comes in. But I think that's when we talk about technical development. For me, it's being more appreciative of what the kids are actually going to see, rather than, again, like I said earlier, this generic idea that everyone can do everything.
Yeah, this topic brought me back to like the college coach in me, which was when I first started as a college coach. I thought the spring was a brilliant, and you still hear this, I'm going to challenge this, like, spring's a great opportunity to make people better. and I thought, this is great. Yeah, you can get out without matches, you can do small group sports. And I am a big proponent of positional training. Well, it's not positional training. That is because I'm a big proponent of everything aligning together. Right. I don't believe that you can have a learning segment of the game and then a heavy schedule of a game. I need a little bit of a diet, needs a bit more balance. But like, was that learning environment good for those players to do more touches and technical work? 100%. The learning environment was great. But hand on heart, did it make player X better in 6 months who was maybe struggling on left foot, or maybe no chance. It didn't. Right. And that's something that I would no problem in saying, like, that. Mm-hmm. You can only technically, if you isolate the technical, you can only improve a player minimally over a certain age group. My 6-year-old kid is going to be different. Right. But my 16-year-old midfielder or my 21-year-old midfielder, what you're saying there is there that when you get to the decision-making of the game, mm-hmm. that's whenever you see the difference. You're not going to move the bar that much.
Well, I think we add to that as well, Gary. Like, if you think about the difference between your fall season and spring season as a college coach, right? The biggest difference is the games, right? That's the other part. And if you've got kids who are playing more in the spring than what they were in the fall. And yeah, maybe there's an opportunity there for them to improve because they have that game piece where they've got something tangible at the end of it to say, well, this is where we've improved. If we're purely grading people on a bell curve of how they train, then yeah, I'm not so sure as the same legitimacy, because if that was the case, mate, I'd be a great player.
Yeah, this could be a training. This is a different podcast. Where should we have gone with training habits? Like, I should have been Premier League. Yeah. It's just when I think about it, I'm giggling, thinking, you still hear it? I love the spring. I love a 3-month break that we can't play any matches. Which brings me along nicely to one of my questions, Steve. How do you then monitor progress or judge progress if you're going to say player X is, I keep saying inexperienced, but basically not at the level that you would need that or want that player to be at? How do you judge that player over 6 months?
Listen, it's really hard, and I guess this is the piece now where if you've got let's say an established team, right? So let's say you've got a set 11 in your head, or a 12 or a 13, and again, it's going to have to be in some sort of inter squad scrimmage or inter-program scrimmage where you're able to base against each other. If obviously it's a striker, it's goals. If it's a goalkeeper, it's saves, percentages, and whatnot. But ultimately, mate, if we're actually grading performance, it's really hard, right? I mean, it's outcomes, obviously, right? And obviously, there's the eye test there. Is someone fitter? Is someone stronger? Like, do you see more energy there? But again, I go back to it from a purely training perspective. I'm sure you've had them as much as we all have. There's some players who are terrible in training, can't even run, but they'll win a game for you on a Saturday, and that's the weird part of football. I mean, I know they always say at the professional level there's those players and you hear all the anecdotes, but there's not a team I haven't coached that player is involved in. We'd love every day to be a James Milner, right? A Jordan Henderson, I'm sure, are the best trainers and the best guys, but sometimes, you just need that little X factor, and unfortunately, until you get back playing games, you're not going to be able to see that. I don't think, anyway.
Yeah, and I don't think, Ali, that you're being a results-focused coach if you're saying that the game is the game, because then you're overlooking the fact that, was it Allen Iverson, practice? We're talking about practice. Are you going to judge me on that as well? 10 people come to my head when I think of that there, players that were useless in training. And you listen to Under the Cosh podcast and they tell you 50 more who you thought there's no way that player had no interest. But it's actually like, all right, the inexperienced player isn't going to go on and actually dominate on a Saturday or a Wednesday or Tuesday if they struggle to do basics. I understand that. But you might be overvaluing the drill over the match itself, right? Because matches come down to, again, I've coached it. I've coached at high school, middle school. There's an element of competing, closing people down. That's got value there. Sure. Yeah. Some drills, they're not good at some drills. Some training sessions, you don't see that.
Well, listen, this is the thing, and I guess it surprised me this year, right? I'll give a quick example. I coached that under-16s team in Charlotte here, and Red Bulls came and picked up the centre-back from the team this year. A brilliant defender, 6 foot tall, great athlete, but not someone that I would have said at the start of the year, this is a technically gifted footballer who's going to make his way in an MLS academy. But what I thought was excellent is that they looked at his characteristics, looked at his personality. They just looked at him as a raw athlete, raw defender, went, well, we can develop that. And I think that's maybe where we've lost our way a little bit in football sometimes, is that that's not always the case, is it? We always want the technically gifted player that we can hopefully develop into an athlete. And, just being a good defender in itself, again, is something that I think we've lost our way a little bit. We don't value enough. Give those players some, rudimentary skills that they can move the ball and maybe carry it forward and do something a bit more functional with it. But like you said, I think it's, going down into the details of everything's got to be dribbling and one touches. I'm not so sure we need to be there all the time.
You said something there earlier about the exercise about using midfielders in the rondo in a certain way. Do you think that you could perhaps organise a system of play that has players organised into different skill levels, or is that a little bit idealistic?
Well, I think if you go back to, the genesis of 4-4-2, right? Again, if we go back to the sort of very early days, even back in the British football we were growing up, Irish football, it was one where that was the sort of best spread of the people on the field, right? And I think that's sort of where that came from. Now, I would argue we're looking at it more through the lens of like, where are my best players? Where can I get my best players on the ball? And I see teams now, a lot of clubs for the longest time would have a set formation that this is where I play, 4-3-3, it's attacking fullbacks, regardless, even if the kids can't do it, this is how we play. And there's other clubs now that are a bit more pragmatic and saying, well, if I've got 3 good centre-backs and maybe want them this week, so I'll play 3 at the back with, only 2 players out wide, so now there's less onus that I need actual wingers, I don't need to worry about wide attackers, I can put more midfielders if I've got them. But in terms of sort of how you position players and whatnot, I think this is where it comes back to a skill sets thing of if you're going to put, let's say, a diamond 4-4-2, right, a lot of people in the middle of the field, and they're not all technically able to play with each other. There's now going to be these huge gaps elsewhere you've got to try and defend. So I think that's where it's understanding the players and trying to best spread it out. I think that's for me why I would typically always start with a 4-4-2, the youth team, and then sort of work my way forward from there, because 4 or 5 games into the season you'll understand where teams will play. And again, go back to my example earlier about the 16s team I coached this year. We finished the season with a 3 at the back, a diamond 4 and 3 up front. I mean, the most complicated nonsense ever, but we started from a position of 4-4-2, like it's just how we got there, And I think that's where sometimes coaches need to be a little bit more, I find anyway, a little bit more adaptable to the situation and the players you've got, rather than going in with a preset idea of, we're going to do this, and then shoehorn everybody into it,
Yeah, that's exactly the way I would approach it tactically. Would be, all right, if I'm going to, on the front and back end, I'm going to apply pressure, high pressure up the park, so at least get everyone working hard. And because I don't think the things that you would want in a high school or club season would be, energy, enthusiasm, high work rate, enjoying the game. It's hard to do that in a system that you're saying, all right, well, we don't have X and Y, we'll sit back and play on the counter attack.
Right.
Because sitting back, we've all been there. It sounds as if you're actually not taking any risks, but you do that for 4 weeks and you're in a dark place.
Right.
So at least get up and then, so a front 2, I definitely go up front 2, I definitely go a back 4, because a back 4 gives you can manage, and if we go back to high school, narrow pitches, normally a way that you can shift them across. Plus, it's a way that you can also manage a midfield a little bit better if you're playing a 2 and a 3 or a 1 and a 3, and a bit more variables. How do you think then, from a coach, if a coach is systematically keeping it not basic, but starting from a position of understanding, do you think a coach who maybe has got inexperienced players needs to be wary of information and communication and how they're doing that there? Because that's got to be an adjustment period as well for an inexperienced player, right? Not just the technical part.
Totally. I mean, off the ball, again, let's take a quick example of, best laid plans. We lose the ball. What we're going to do, and again, if we put all our eggs in here's how we build up, here's how we attack, here's how we finish. The minute we lose the ball, if you're, again, 4-4-2, for example, 2 wingers are stood out like linesmen, and, they don't come inside, all of a sudden you're dead because you get 2 players trying to defend the full width of the field. So it's those understanding. And we talk a lot about hard work in football. We talk a lot about energy and helping your teammates, getting back, getting forward. I think there's sometimes a lack of understanding from the coach of, well, if you want us to attack in whatever shape, right, we can't suddenly like morph into or teleport ourselves 70 yards somewhere else to go defend. How are we going to approach this, right? And, you know, you see a lot sometimes in youth football now, they'll say everybody's got to squeeze the back line up, and then the wee goalkeeper stood in his goal line, you know, rather than literally bringing everybody forward, you know, and trying to manage in behind the goal and behind the back line. So I think that's where there's, you know, they are children or they are youth players at the end of the day. They're not going to be able to solve every problem. But for us as coaches and adults to sort of take away some of those anxieties is to, okay, if we lose it in this spot, here's who we think could go press the ball. Here's how we're going to go and move. And that may be one of the defenders steps forward, becomes a midfielder for a couple of minutes. It might be that one of the midfielders drops back, makes it a 5 for a couple of minutes. Like, however that is, I personally, I think that's a critical part of our development as coaches now. That, again, I think a lot of the minutiae of coaching we've maybe lost a little bit over last couple of years.
Brilliant. All right, last couple for you. Have a bit of fun. Let's say you've gone to, I don't know what I call this, half an hour ago, park, something, East Park, Heister, training job now. Let's just say I'll give you one position that you want to have an experience, your top player, state player of the year, Division 1, full ACC, whatever it is. What position do you want?
Give me a striker any day of the week. Somebody can score me goals. It's the hardest thing to coach in football for me. It's the most thing we do a lot of. Obviously, we talk about attacking movements, but how many actual shooting sessions do we do during the year? Not a lot. So if you've got somebody who's naturally good at it, I'll be honest, I'm not so big on the profile. Maybe once upon a time I would have said this had to be a target striker, but I think nowadays, you know, having somebody that can literally just put the ball in the net, I think is critical.
All right, and then the other one is what position would you take a punt on and say, do you know what? Give me a player and I can turn it into you. I can utilize that player with either the basics or a bit of coaching, or I can just hide it.
I'd say a wide player, and the reason I say that is that I think over the last couple of years I've went from every team I coach, I like having width. I like having wide players that stay wide and attack for the flanks. But I'd say in the last couple of years, I think I've become a bit more amiable to maybe changing that up a little bit. So maybe putting a midfielder out there and come inside and play a little bit, or come in off the sides and join in. So I'd say a player that would operate out wide that maybe isn't one that we, you know, Adam is a third centre midfielder. We have the ball or without the ball, and try and solve the problem that way.
Last piece of advice for a coach who's listened to this and gone, I'm still struggling with it. Basically, frustrated at not the players, but just the overall situation. Maybe it's support from administration or whatever it is. A coach that's just struggling internally dealing with this type of situation. What would you have?
The first one would be to think of the team. What does the team need? If you take care of the team, then usually the players take care of themselves, right? So you can give them the empathy and the care, the attention, then usually they'll give you it back, right? If your first instinct is to yell at people, then it's probably not going to work out for you at that environment. But at the same time, you also need to think of individual development as that. It's on an individual basis. So if you don't have the relationship, you don't take time, maybe after the training, before the training, during the training, to literally talk to a person one-on-one, then, you know, it doesn't matter how many individual sessions you run, everyone's got a ball. They're not going to improve because they're not going to feel you're invested in them. And I think that's, again, a big part we've maybe lost as coaches, that when we deliver a message, we think we've delivered it to everyone, but maybe not everyone's taken on board. So I think that would be the critical piece I think I've learned in the last 5 to 10 years in my career is talk to people more like on a one-to-one level.
Brilliant. Okay, talk to us a little bit about we've got some plan in the works for you to help out an MSC project that we're working on. You're transitioning to more analysis stuff and some consultancy stuff by yourself. talk to me about that journey over the last couple of months.
So I was full time with Charlotte Soccer Academy in the city here. I'm still involved with the staff and ECL program, but moving away from coaching to take more of a sort of, I guess, a full time approach to analysis. It was something that I've been working on for the last couple of years now. So Insight Analysis is the name of the group, and basically it's to try and provide video analysis services, scouting services, basically just a little bit more support to colleges, youth soccer clubs, lower level professional clubs that need basically additional help, right? Not everyone's got access to all these off the field areas, or certainly they just might not have the expertise, so they might just need some help. So hopefully I can lend my, up to 10 years worth of experience doing this, like we all do, right? We all duck and dive, got to coach teams, got to try prepare. I've learned hopefully over the last couple of years ways that I can show other people to develop at that, and hopefully provide some services for them as well.
Brilliant. Coaches and players? Yes, certainly. And I think the interesting piece, obviously coming on yourself, Gary, is trying to develop more of a, like I mentioned earlier, there, investing in players, and hopefully players can invest in themselves and giving them the platform to hopefully develop as well. Brilliant. All right, watch this space. We've got some stuff coming up in the near future, and I hope there's a great response to this episode, and we can solve the world's problems one by one every week. Good. All right, these have a bit of crack.
Charlie, that's that. We'd try it.
Brilliant. Ali, thanks so much. I love that. This has been great. Thank you.
Appreciate it, mate. Thanks a lot.